Mitch, you've done more than 1,000 translations for Marxist.org. How did that come about?
Well, yeah, I told the story the other day that it was, I can't say it was on a whim, but it was more or less on a whim that I wrote to volunteer because I just needed to do something with with the knowledge of French I had, because I had been reading French for decades, but I hadn't done anything with it. And I just before that, I worked on a strange project transcribing all the records of the Jewish community of Istanbul.
Wow.
And I absolutely loved it because I had to be able to decipher handwritings, work out stuff in Turkish. And that's so that project came to an end. And I said, I need to do something else.
Yeah.
So that was when, I wrote to you. And it started out, as I said, with Blanqui. And at first I thought that everything had to be very specifically Marxist or Marxist oriented. And it was shortly after I began that I asked you if I could do stuff about Haiti.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And because there's all kinds of great documents from the Haitian struggle for independence, the rebellion against the French, that had never been translated. And it's a fascinating story. It's an ugly, horrible story, but a fascinating one, bloody and all that. And so I did that. And once, you gave me like the go ahead, that's why I give you so much credit for everything. Then it just opened the floodgates. And it was everything that I was interested in that was in French, then became fair game. So, there were obvious things, that would interest, a crowd, the people who go to the site, like the Paris Commune. But again, where there was no collection of primary documents of the commune. So from books that I had, from the website, the fabulous website of the French National Library, I got dozens and dozens and dozens of documents on the Paris Commune. And then I did stuff with early French atheism. 18th century French atheism, again, things that hadn't been translated. People like the priest Méliès, who was the one who actually first came up with the expression that he was the day that the last aristocrat was hung with the bowels of the last priest, was actually from Méliès. So, so I worked on that stuff, and actually I can even date that. It was the year that my mother died, because I believe it or not, I was translating atheist texts while I was sitting next to my mother while she was dying in the ICU in a hospital. So that would be 2005. But so it just kept, everything that I cared about in French history, the French resistance, particularly the immigrant Jewish communists. Which might seem like a real niche, but there was a really important movement, and they're great heroes, even now. And in fact, my son's middle name is Misak, in honor of the leader of the group of French foreign communists who were all executed in February 1944. Louis Aragon wrote a poem about them, which was turned into a song. And there were the other moments in French history that I was interested in, like the war in Algeria, from both the Algerian side, meaning the Algerians who were fighting the French, but on the French side also, the less well-known story of the French who assisted the FLN. I worked on tons of that stuff also. Weird things like the Algerian Communist Party, which is kind of a forgotten element in the struggle for independence, but they did not take the same line as the French Communist Party, which was kind of waffled on the matter of independence. The Algerian communists not only supported independence, they actually had their own armed force that was all wiped out in the first battle they fought, but nevertheless, they had it. And I just kept branching out. May 68, the French Revolution, focusing mainly on the Jacobins, but even more on the sans-culottes, the enragés, the people much further to the left, the Jacobins, the ones who, people who in fact the Jacobins had guillotine.
In the stuff you were choosing to translate, there's a real flavor of the ultra left. I mean, that spate of translations of what I call the bomb throwing anarchists of the turn of the century, for example. What's going on there? Your interest in this really a rejectionist ultra kind of politics?
Well, there you go. You just had it. You just got it, Andy. Yeah. Because the fact is, personally, I have never, to this day, and so since I'm 2 weeks shy of 70, we can guess that I'll die never having lit a firecracker.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Exactly.
I'm the most, I try to be as sedentary as humanly possible. But it doesn't mean that I don't hate the world that we're living in. And, I'm not going to be throwing bombs, but there were people who did. And, somebody like Émile Henry, actually that whole spate of people who threw bombs, Vaillant, who threw a bomb in the Chamber of Deputies, and Ravachol, who planted bombs, but also robbed graves. It was just, I think it was in the first time we spoke, I spoke about, anger and hatred. And that's, so especially the bomb throwers, it's just that pure hatred, when Émile Henry talked about, there are no innocent victims. And, and recently I came across something that I'd never even thought of. There's a great French novelist named Louis Guillou, and I got his correspondence with Camus. And Guillou was on the left. And Guillou was reading the Russian populists, reading about them. And he wondered, he wrote to Camus, I don't get it. Why did they never throw bombs at the workers too? Because, for them, the workers were complicit in their own slavery by accepting their slavery. And I said, you know what? I can't believe I never thought of that. I'm with that. Why did they not kill workers? Although Émile Henry, throwing bombs in cafes was kind of like, whoever got killed because there are no innocent victims. So it's just my my anger, my rage, my whatever, that's my release,
Because you don't treat your own generation, let alone the current young generation, with the same generosity that you treat these historical figures, do you?
No, and that's a really good point. And somebody even asked me about that not too long ago, just a few months ago. And I don't know that I can give a real, legit answer, because had I lived, through that, in that period, I don't doubt that I would have hated them too. It was, I was going to say that other great Marxist Groucho, but there is a line of Groucho Marx that really resonates, and that's whatever, no matter what it is and who commenced it, I'm against it.
Yeah. So,
right. I mean, that it's easy for me, and I think this was the answer that I came up with. With the distance of time, I could be more forgiving because it doesn't really matter. But I try to think, what would I have done in the middle of, when the Communist Party was strong in France? If I would have been in France, would I have hated them, or would I have said, "Oh yes, this is the party of the working class"? I can't imagine myself being positive about anything. And that's also why I do some,
looking back in history, for someone, with your history, you are very, generous is not the right word, but very sort of even-handed in your treatment of the Communist Party, even in its role in 1968, which you'll find very few people on the left will.
Right. And it's funny because just yesterday I was sent the edited text for the chapter of a book on May 68 that I wrote. It was a talk I delivered actually in England at the University of Nottingham, where I defended the French Communist Party. And I almost got lynched because you can't sit in a room of academics and say anything positive about the Communist Party, which is all the more reason to say it.
Yeah.
And
You are a
but
bit of
I
a
have to say-
contrarian, aren't you?
yeah, but I am a contrarian, but I believe, I often say when I give talks, I say, I don't always agree with what I say. And but in the case of like the French Communist Party in May 68, the more I think about it, and I think about it often, and the more I read about it, the more I do think that they were right. And I have to say that was really a reaction, because when I interviewed communists, they impressed me. I loved the people, the students who had now grown old. They were wonderful people. They were generous people. They couldn't do enough for me, and they were great. But there was just something more authentic about these communists. And I got something I got in trouble for a brief while. I had a Twitter account.
Yeah.
And it was only so that I could contact the New York City Transit Authority about delays on the subway, because they had a great unit. You have to put down a description of yourself. And I described myself as an anarcho-Stalinist. And I stand by that characterization, because the anarcho part is my attraction, not so much to the bomb throwers, but to the individualist anarchists, people like the young Victor Sturge, whose like entire ideology was based on the working class is so hopeless that there's nothing, you can't expect anything good to come of them. And he was real prescient. And so the anarcho part of it is that I don't believe there's any possibility for change. And so it's out of that tradition. On the brief moments, but when there is something political that I feel positive about, that's the Stalinist part. Because we could say what we will, but the working class, when there was like a chance of anything, was active and political. You could only find them. The high point was the Stalin years of the communist movement. There's absolutely no question about it. It's when the French Communist Party, the Popular Front. It was when the Italian Communist Party was main force in the resistance, and then became a counter society within Italian society. And so those brief moments of optimism, I consider myself a Stalinist. And in fact, hang on, don't go. Can you see my coffee cup?
Yeah, Stalin.
So, and I have pictures around the house of Ataturk and Stalin everywhere. The Ataturk, I smuggled them in, because my wife said when we went to Turkey, I don't want to come home and the house is decorated in early Ataturk. So what I did was I came up with a stack of pictures, and then I just put up one a day. Yeah. And it was kind of like a stealth, Kemalist invasion. Yeah. But to go back to to me and the translations, it's also got to do with what would I have done, or who would I have been? So these are periods where, when I'm translating the French Resistance, it's while I'm translating it, I'm in it. And so would I have actually like taken up the gun on the streets of Paris if I was like a young Jew in 1943? We all like to think we would, but we probably wouldn't. I mean, there were only 100 people carrying weapons against the Germans in Paris in 1944. Or like I've done a ton of translations of the far left in Argentina in the 70s and 80s. And that one was like an easy one. It's not just because I'm really interested in left-wing Peronism and all that, but a family like mine, the options where you were going to move to were pretty much Argentina and America. Yeah. So had my family gone to Buenos Aires, and there was one part of the family that did go to Buenos Aires, would I have been a Montonero? Would I have been one of the disappeared? Again, it would assume that Marcelo Abidor would have been not sedentary. He would have been like willing to risk his life,
Mm.
where I would bet that no matter where I am in the world, I would just rather be reading books and watching films.
Yeah.
But while I'm translating this stuff from the Montoneros,
Yeah.
I'm a Montonero. I mean, I have
Yeah.
pictures around the house. I have Montonero, like original flyers from the Montoneros.
Yeah.
It's a fantasy life.
Yeah,
And
look,
it's
I think there's a
fantasy life.
huge element of this romanticism, isn't it, in the left? Always has been, and I suppose I appreciate the fact that you're very clear on it. Whereas a lot of people, like the section of the left in Australia that fights the revolution everywhere in the world except in Australia, you know.
Right.
And I don't know how conscious they are of the absurdity of this, you know. Look, just to move on a little bit, when
Sure.
did you start writing for Jewish Currents?
Well, actually, I started writing for Jewish Currents 40 years ago. 40 years ago, because at the time it was still, it's too complicated to tell a story of like Jewish communists. It had been a communist magazine. They moved a little bit. They were no longer communist. However, there was still, you know, whatever. And I had a friend, my closest friend at the time, the one who, when I told the story about marching through the campus, chanting Jeunesse communiste révolutionnaire, he was really into Jewish Currents and the old Yiddish communist newspaper, the Morgen Freiheit, and which then had a 1-page in English. So he got me interested in this stuff. And when I discovered the FTP-MOI, the foreign communists, I thought, there's something I can write. I really want to write an article about. And I proposed it to Jewish Currents in 1981 or so.
Wow, long time.
And they loved the idea and they ran it. It was a tremendously long article, very romantic, very romantic.
But I always read your Jewish Currents blogs when you alert me to them, and it's a platform you use for current political comment. And I think your comments on current affairs when you do them are very sharp. There's nothing romantic, nothing ultra left about them. And they're very good.
Thank you. Yeah. And you see, Jewish Currents though underwent a change, and so the editor left a few years ago, who I've been working with for years and years and years and years, and loved me and respected me, and he let me write anything I wanted. I mean, I wrote articles there. I mean, it's one of my proudest accomplishments, I have to say, was I wrote an article in which I said that the closer a Jew is, or the more religious a Jew is, the closer they are to anti-Semitic stereotypes. And I said, I am not guilty of prejudice here. I invented the concept of post-judice. Because prejudice is you're judging people before. Me, I'm judging them afterwards. Experience has taught me that, the worst landlords, the worst cheats, the worst owners of nursing homes were Orthodox Jews, ultra-Orthodox Jews. Walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's duck. Nothing I can do about it. So I wrote an article about it. And, I give credit to the editor that he published it. Yeah. Okay. Well,
must have got a lot of flack.
Nobody read the magazine, so I could have written anything. Yeah. I mean, I was always tempted to write in the middle of an article and an elephant just walked across my living room because nobody would ever notice it anyway. But and even a couple of years ago, when there was this, furor about the rise of anti-Semitism and people are being attacked in my neighborhood, and I want to make it clear, I was not the person doing the attacks. Contrary to all the accusations, was not me. However, so Jewish Currents, which now has a very young leadership, they're all in their 30s, they wrote articles, we need to work with the Hasidic community and the Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox, which I thought was the stupidest thing I ever heard in my whole life. And when I went out for dinner with the current editor, she told me, and when we had this argument, she said, well, Mitch, it makes no difference. Your article that you wrote all those years ago killed it, because a group that we were working with searched Jewish Currents and Orthodox and came up with your article saying that they're all a justification for anti-Semitism. So I'm really proud of the fact that I put the kibosh on any attempt at working with the people that I consider like the vilest representatives of the Jewish people that have ever been. But I digress.
Apart from Stalinism and
Yeah, okay.
ultra-anarchism, there are writers like Proust and Celine, which I would think from any point of view at all, their views will be abhorrent to you. And yet, you like them, you recommend them, you write a lot about them. How come?
Right. Well, Proust, because Proust, Proust and Celine are like the two poles of French literature. Proust, aristocratic, that beautiful florid prose that, sentences that flow for pages and pages. Celine with his like short, punchy stuff, real working class, popular. But, so Proust is not so much of a problem because Proust, I think, I've written it a couple of times. If the human race were to disappear, you could reconstruct everything about it in the pages of Proust. Right. Every human sentiment, everything. Celine is a little different matter because I've translated his anti-Semitic writings because his novels, there's no anti-Semitism in his novels. He put that all in what he called his pamphlets, which have been suppressed. They haven't, you can find them in France, anti-Semitic websites or whatever. A few years ago, they were published by a small publishing house in Quebec because they went into the public domain. And I thought it was stuff that needed to be known. I wasn't like advocating, for the massacre of Jews, but you can't understand Celine without that stuff, without understanding that stuff. And it's dangerous, and I know it's dangerous because just like for MIA, I've translated, the worst anti-Semites of the 19th century in France, and it's dangerous, and that stuff does get picked up for all the wrong reasons. And so I've had people who been really angry with me. One person cut off all contact with me when I started publishing Celine's correspondence and his anti-Semitic writings. And I published a book of them even, in which I said that people think that Celine wasn't really anti-Semitic, that it was really just a satire on anti-Semitism because it's so extreme. But I said you can't read these letters or these writings and say that he meant every word that he said.
I remember when Bernie first ran, you were a supporter of Bernie in the primaries and things, but you had doubts about him as well, I think. And when you had the prospect of Trump being his opponent, you were very, you were concerned about supporting Bernie. How do you reflect on Bernie and in that part of the American left at the moment?
Well, there's a difference between the Bernie at the beginning and the Bernie, or the support of Bernie at the beginning, that's sort of Bernie, especially the second time around. And it's something that I like argue with my son and with many people. I supported Bernie. I have 2 Bernie bumper stickers on my car. I always brag about the fact that he grew up 4 blocks from here. I mean, I know exactly the building I went to a rally there, but mainly what I didn't appreciate about Bernie and his supporters is they didn't accept the fact that he lost, and that he lost because people didn't support him, either his program or his. They didn't think he could win.
Yeah, and
that was what, especially the second time around, got on my nerves. And whereas the first time I was out it's the first time since the 70s maybe that I stood on street corners for a candidate. It was for Bernie.
Yeah.
And it was a great experience. Like people, I'm sure it's the same in Australia, standing on a street corner, giving out flyers, you got a petition. It's like, get the fuck away from me. But then when I would say, I'm here for Bernie, people would like turn around after they told me to fuck off. And it was great the first time around. The second time, the act was kind of old.
Yeah.
And, the fact is, Biden got more votes, just as it's, the system was not rigged against Bernie Sanders or against first time or the second.
Yeah.
People voted for the other person. But that's why I hate, among the many reasons why I hate most leftists, is because we're right, the only way we could be losing is because, we're being cheated or the game is rigged, and they don't realize that all they are is they're talking like Trumpists. The game is rigged. It's not rigged. We live in we don't live in a democracy. We live in a republic. But if people vote for somebody, they win. But so there's all these illusions that the left has. Like when we talk about however many members of the DSA have been elected to office, but there's a fact that gets left out. No DSA member has ever defeated a Republican. I mean, in a primary. I'm sorry. They only win in electoral districts that were previously Democratic. They've not displaced a single Republican. So in effect, they haven't done a fucking thing, because it's going to be the same vote in Congress. So they put forth these programs. We see what's going on now. Nothing's going to happen with them because our system is set up. It's not rigged. It was set up by the founding fathers to foil pretty much everything. It was not a democratic system to start with. So, wait, I'm getting all worked up here. I don't even remember what I'm talking about. However, but so it's this, the illusion of the left that it's no longer the revolution is next Thursday, which I talked about, I think, the first, but it's the next election. We're going to carry, because really the people want this. This is what the people want. If that's what they wanted, they would fucking vote for it. But they don't. And so that was like my problem with Bernie. And Bernie was like really bitter. I was bitter towards the end of the first time around. And the second time he was like bitter from the start. The crowds weren't there that they were the first time around. He was still the most decent politician that we've had in my lifetime. But, decent.
Do you see a future for the left in America at the moment?
No, we have no past, then we have no future. Because, and it's funny, you should ask that. Because whenever I give a talk about anything, Paris Commune, or my book on the Bisbee deportation in the IWW, or pretty much any sort of French Revolution. What is our lesson for today from blah, blah, blah? And I always feel obliged to say, well, yeah, granted it was France in 1789, but still we can learn from the French Revolution that whatever. But there's nothing we can take from that. The Paris Commune, what could we possibly take from the Paris Commune? And it became, finally with my book on Bisbee, set in America, what can we learn today from it? And all I could say was, finally, I had enough of it. It's 10% of the American working classes in unions. If you subtract, public employees, what could you possibly learn from an anarchist union in Arizona in the mines in 1917 and apply it to today? There's really almost nothing, because the situation has changed so much. So, we'll always be, nipping at the heels of those in power, and they could ignore us quite well. And, the differences that we have in America, and probably maybe in Australia too, is we haven't fallen very far. So whereas in a country like France, where the Communist Party used to get 25% of the vote, and now all 12 left-wing candidates, and I'm not exaggerating here, add up to 21%. So the fall from what was to what is pretty steep in countries like France and in Italy. Here, we were nothing before, and we're nothing now. A bunch of academics, bunch of young people, and when people, young people, think that, and my son does this and his friends, my generation, our generation, the baby boomers, we're at fault for everything. We failed, we didn't do this, we didn't do that. And the world is the way it is today because of us. Except think back, Andy, to 1968, 1969, when we were young.
Mm.
We're different. We're going to change the world.
Mm.
And, we failed miserably. I think that, the effort was worth doing. And I don't regret a moment of anything that
But
I've
the
done.
thing is, the we who were different and were going to change everything, reality was we were a small minority. We made a lot of noise, but we were only a minority.
Exactly. But we were out there, but we thought, but the same thing today, that somehow, we didn't fail.
Mm.
I mean, we didn't fail. We tried, we didn't win. And, fighting against the Vietnam War, we didn't end the war, but at least we were out there on the streets, civil rights movement, all that stuff. We did try, and we thought we were going to change the same way young people today think we're different. We thought we were different.
When you wrote about your oral history about May 68,
right.
and you spoke to all the people that participated in that, and you'll put it right for me, something like that they wanted to change France or whatever, but they did. I can't remember how you put it. They didn't, of course, create an anarchist society.
Right.
But they did change France. France before 68, France after 68, not the same thing.
Right. But and even in my darkest moment, I give them full credit for that. But the question I always asked was, given that France is always, a few years behind America, wouldn't they have ultimately gotten there anyway? And so that was for me the key question.
Yeah.
And the best answer that I got was from Jean-Jacques Lebel, who's an artist who speaks perfect English because he spent many years in America when he's young. And he said no, that it needed an explosion for France to move forward. And that is a tremendous success. One of the, Jean-Michel Rabatte, who lives now in Philadelphia and who was at the École Normale with Bernard-Henri Lévy, he said the France he grew up in was like Salazar's Portugal.
Yeah.
So 68, changed the way people lived and everything, but it didn't change. And that's the point that I made, was that for the ruling class, just to talk like, some typical leftist. So you want to have, you want to like all sleep together, and girls, you want to wear short skirts. So sei mitglick. Enjoy yourself, go to town.
But it didn't change the state, and it didn't overthrow capitalism.
Right. That is not going to happen. So if, everybody smoking dope becomes a better way, makes them happy, and then capitalism could continue to function, that was, that's why, marijuana is now, legal in New York, even though it's not legal. You walk down the streets, the governor, the mayor's, last mayor said, we're not going to ever arrest anybody for it again. But that's fine, because the more stoned you are, the less of a risk you are.